Welcome to the Explainer. We're about to show you how a tiny, unassuming piece of metal can do some pretty incredible things. I'm talking about proving a king won a war, revealing a lost form of government, and even completely changing the timeline of ancient architecture. Yeah, you heard that right. Today we're unlocking the secrets of Indian coins.
So let's just start with a simple question, but it's one that kind of frames everything we're about to talk about. What if a single coin, just one, lost for centuries, could completely rewrite a chapter of history? I know, it sounds like something out of a movie, right? But it's not. It's a very real thing, and it's at the absolute heart of what we're digging into today. Okay, first things first. We're talking about coins being more than just money. So how exactly does that work?
All right, the fancy official term for all this is numismatics, the study of coins and money. But here's the thing, when we're talking about ancient India, this isn't just some hobby for collectors. No, it's more like a vital form of historical detective work. And the reason why is absolutely crucial.
And here it is. For huge stretches of ancient Indian history, we just don't have a lot of written records. I mean, think about it. Manuscripts decay, they rot, and a lot of history was passed down orally, person to person. But metal? Metal survives. It lasts. And that's what makes these officially issued coins one of our most direct, most reliable sources for figuring out what was actually going on.
So how did we get here? How did India go from just trading goods to actually minting currency? Well, for thousands of years, trade was direct, my cow for your grain. In the Vedic period, things got a little more sophisticated with what you might call moneyed objects, things that had an accepted value, like cattle. But let's be honest, you can't exactly make change from a cow when you're buying bread. The real revolution, the game changer, came around the 6th century BCE with the very first punch-marked coins. Suddenly, value was standardized, and commerce was changed forever.
All right, so let's talk about how these incredible little historical documents were actually made. The process of forging history? Well, it tells its own fascinating story.
The earliest coins were what we call punch-marked. And it's exactly what it sounds like. You'd literally hammer individual symbols one by one onto a blank piece of metal. You can imagine it was super slow. Then you had casting, pouring molten metal into clay molds. That was definitely faster, but the results were often kind of crude, not really good enough for precious metals like gold or silver. The real breakthrough, though, was die striking. This was introduced by the Indo-Greeks, and it was brilliant. You'd use two dies to strike both sides of a coin at the exact same time. It was efficient, it allowed for incredible artistic detail, and it's basically the same technique we still use today. Pretty amazing, right?
Okay, now for what I think is the most exciting part. Actually reading the past. Once you learn their language, what can these coins really tell us? Let's find out.
Well, for one, they reveal a ton about religious history. I mean, it's just fascinating. Rulers would put their gods, their goddesses, all kinds of religious symbols right there on the coins. And what that does is it gives us some of the earliest, most concrete evidence we have for certain religious practices and images.
And this is exactly where a single coin can just completely rewrite history. Check this out. The earliest known physical remains of temples in India, they're from the Gupta period, right around the 4th century CE. But look at this coin. It's from the Audumbar Kingdom, and it was minted centuries before that. And what does it show? A structural temple, plain as day. So what does that tell us? It suggests these kinds of buildings existed long, long before we have any physical ruins of them. Maybe because they were built out of wood. One tiny coin, and it pushes the entire timeline of Indian architecture way back.
Here's another great example. This perfectly shows how cultures would fuse and ideas would evolve. On the early coins from the Gupta dynasty, you see a goddess of prosperity who looks a lot like the Iranian deity Archaeology. She's even holding a cornucopia. But then you look at later coins from the same dynasty, and she's transformed. She's become the goddess Lakshmi that we all recognize today, seated on a lotus. You can literally watch a religious icon evolve and become uniquely Indian right there on their money. How cool is that?
And it's not just about religion. Coins are absolutely invaluable for piecing together political history, too. You have to think of them like official state documents, telling us exactly who was in charge, what their fancy titles were, and sometimes even what their biggest ambitions were.
I mean, how do we know what kind of government a kingdom had 2,000 years ago? Well, sometimes you can just read it right on their coins. For example, the Gupta emperors used the title Maharaja di Raja, which means King of Kings. That's a pretty clear statement of absolute monarchy, right? But then you have coins from the Yaudeya people, and they bear the word Gana, which means assembly or tribe. That tells us they had a republican form of government. So there you go, 2 little coins, 2 completely different political systems.
Now this is amazing. It's a literal declaration of victory, frozen in metal. It's what's called an overstruck coin. So what happened was, the winning king, a Satavahana king, took his rival's coins and just stamped his own symbols right over his enemies. Can you imagine? It's a total act of domination, right on the money. And for historians, this is absolute gold dust. Why? Because it proves who won the war, and it proves that these 2 kings were ruling at the same time. That helps lock down the entire historical timeline for that period. Just incredible.
Okay, so let's zoom out a bit. When you put it all together, what's the grand legacy of these little metal storytellers?
When you look at the timeline, you just see this incredibly dynamic history, where every single era leaves its own unique metallic fingerprint. You go from those really simple early punch marks to the stunningly realistic portraits introduced by the Indo-Greeks. Then you have the artistic masterpieces of the Guptas, followed by the beautiful calligraphy of the Islamic sultanates, and finally you get to the perfectly uniform machine-struck coins of the British era. Every single coin is a perfect product of its time.
So when it comes right down to it, what makes coins so special? Well, they offer this unique combination of traits that almost no other historical source can match. First, they're authentic. They were officially made by the people in power. They're reliable primary sources. You can't go back and edit a coin like you can a manuscript. They're incredibly durable. They can survive fire, floods, you name it. And because they were minted in huge numbers, they're verifiable. You can find multiple examples and compare them. It's a historian's dream, really.
And that brings us to one last, really provocative thought. The story that Indian coins have to tell us, it is far from over. Right now, there are thousands of coin hoards, literally the buried savings of ancient people, still lying hidden under the soil. Each one of them is a perfect little time capsule, just waiting to be opened. And the only question is, what part of history will they reveal to us next?